And John is the strategic plan manager with King County Stormwater Services section. He brings over 20 years of experience in lead roles with regional environmental planning, habitat restoration, land conservation, and environmental protection. His past roles have included executive director of Seattle Audubon, statewide director for Minnesota Land Trust, and regional program manager with the Sonoma Land Trust. So take it away, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. I'm super curious because it was included in the description that a lot of this work so far has been focused in engaging a lot of jurisdictions around Puget Sound. So I'm curious, are there folks who are here from outside the Puget Sound Basin? Okay, a good few, because we have had good participation from as far away as Spokane and Vancouver, and we often talk about building this regional planning collaborative, and people ask, well, what does regional mean? This is King County driving this. King County isn't necessarily driving this. We are providing the convening capacity for all of us to collectively move this work forward. So just wanted to call that out, and I want to appreciate everyone's participation today, whether you're Puget Sound Basin or not. And as Amy mentioned, I am not a stormwater expert, not by any stretch. We've got a great team of stormwater experts around us. But I was brought into this position with my background in strategic planning, in addition to regional collaborative planning with some big projects in California and Minnesota. So today we are going to be talking about exactly that, collaborative planning and the value that's a part of it. And so there's a few different terms that I want to just create a little glossary for right up front. So Aligning Across Watersheds, the Stormwater Summit, and the Stormwater Investment Plan. We're going to cover all three of those, and I just want to be clear about the distinctions there. So Aligning Across Watersheds is the brand we gave it to try to give it a name that sounds like what it is. And so you'll see Aligning Across Watersheds attached to a lot of the different trainings and convenings that we've done. The Stormwater Summit series is this iterative series of regional engagement events where we are trying to get jurisdictions to see the value and greater cooperation and strategic planning together at the watershed level. And what that is intended to build is the Stormwater Investment Plan. So I'm going to use some of those terms throughout the day today, and I just wanted to be clear on what those are. So let's see here. Okay. So some folks may have seen this graphic before. I'm also going to talk about our Clean Water Healthy Habitat initiative at King County. That's kind of the overall architecture that brings together a lot of these different planning efforts. This was created at the advent of the Clean Water Healthy Habitat initiative to kind of represent the scale of the problem. So for example, here, we know that combined sewer overflows in King County are a serious problem. The content, the problem itself is very different. It's apples and oranges from polluted stormwater, but this is intended to give a sense of the scale of the volume of contribution. So Amy said it in the introduction, a central premise of all of this work is that really individual jurisdictions are responsible for meeting their own NPDES permit requirements, but that's not changing the fact that untreated stormwater is the biggest source of pollution that makes its way to Puget Sound every year. So the question becomes, what could it look like if we actually worked beyond our jurisdictional boundaries, more cooperative, and set some priorities at that regional level? In late 2019, when the Clean Water Healthy Habitat initiative was launched, we started hearing whispers from our county executive's office that he wanted to put a big focus on the stormwater problem, and he wanted to convene a Stormwater Summit in 2021. That was about all the details that we had, and when you ask too many questions, it becomes part of your work plan, which is exactly what happened. So here is an overview of all of the different components of that Clean Water Healthy Habitat initiative. So it spans 30-year goals from healthy forest, more controlled stormwater, reduced toxics, functioning river floodplains, better fish habitat, and resilient marine shorelines. And so what you see here in green are all of these different functional plans that King County is currently working on. A lot of times, I think the public conflates clean water with just one big thing. And internally, I think we know that it's like 31 flavors. Each one of these things is on its own timeline. It has its own drivers. It has its own outcomes, and they integrate together in different ways. But this is all just to call out that among that overall architecture across the county, cleaner controlled stormwater runoff is one of the primary 6 goals for our 30-year plan. And then the stormwater investment plan, what the Summit series is intending to build, is one of those functional plans. So again, I mentioned it was in 2019 that we started to hear about this idea of a Stormwater Summit. And so there we were with the funding appropriated in early 2020, and we wanted to get started, and then the whole world shut down. So in very unideal circumstances, with the funding to do this summit, we didn't even know what the content was. We weren't quite sure of what the audience was. And so we didn't want to figure this out by ourselves. And so in April of 2020, we contracted with a group called Pyramid Communications to kind of help provide some of that support and help us figure it out. But what we needed was more voices in the room who were representative of the problems that we were trying to solve. And so we managed to convene a core partner team to kind of help shepherd some of those decisions and help us kind of intuit our way forward. And so from the nonprofit and community aspect, stewardship partners, the White Center Community Development Association, Puget Sound Keeper, King and Snohomish Conservation Districts, the Seattle 2030 District, and Washington Environmental Council represented the NGO sector. The cities of Redmond, Tacoma, Bellevue, Seattle, and Sammamish were involved. And then on the agency end, the Puget Sound Partnerships local integrating organizations, Department of Ecology, Puget Sound Regional Council, and the Washington Stormwater Center. And then we had a private group, Cascadia Consulting. So it was a pretty representative, broad group to help us kind of figure out the next steps. And what we were able to do with the summit and what we were able to do in convincing leadership that this was the way to get started was to really not necessarily jump to the what we were doing, but to lead with how we wanted to do it. And so what we put forward was this framework that was driven by human, community, and environmental health, and applying health equity as a key driver. So what this ended up becoming was a regional gathering that was intentionally focused on the people who were going to be asked to do this work going forward. So it was focused on the practitioners and the practitioners primarily. It was this chance to frame how we wanted to take on this work and lead with our commitments, primarily our commitment to co-design. And so I think if anybody participated in the ethnic media workshop yesterday, they talked a lot about the community engagement spectrum. King County has a reputation going back of just kind of informing and charging ahead with this is what we're going to do. And we wanted to turn that reputation upside down by leading with a commitment to co-design next steps and outcomes with partners as we proceeded. And so we also really wanted to make sure that we were elevating tribal treaty rights and our local government's obligations to help ensure meeting those tribal treaty rights and really healing our relationships as governments with tribal nations. So we had great representation from tribal representatives. We had youth voices that were represented in all of this who were like kind of the biggest hit of the entire thing. And then we had a very powerful conclusion for this 2-day summit where there was a split screen where you had Suquamish Chair Leonard Forsman, you had King County Executive Dow Constantine, and then you had me trying to like mediate this conversation and ad-libbing on the fly. But ultimately where it landed was an opportunity at the end to reflect on how there was so much more they had in common and we have in common than we don't. And so it was a great foot to set off with the rest of this work, of which there was a significant amount to go. This graphic we pulled together at the last minute to represent just this. These are just the jurisdictions where we had representation from, probably within a day prior to the summit itself. It was awesome, actually. We had 350 people plus who participated from all these different locations across the state. This doesn't even take into consideration that it was also tribal nations, academic institutions, advocacy organizations, community groups, and private industry that was represented. And within all of that, we really wanted the summit to be different from other conferences. We were kind of coming on the heels of several conferences in a row that May of 2021. And we think that we hit it on the head in being a value add to those conferences. So we did a survey afterwards, and 91% of respondents said that we got 4 or 5 marks on all the different categories, but moreover, that they intended to take what they learned and apply it in their work. And at the conclusion, we asked everyone to share one word, and you had like, I think at that point, a couple hundred people. We put it into a word cloud here. And I think that if you can have energized and inspired and hopeful and excited is what people are feeling after 9 hours on Zoom for 2 days, we're headed in the right direction. So again, this element of co-design really landed with people. Co-design is what we really need to deal with any kind of a complex challenge. And so just from a strict definition point of view, co-design is the act of co-creating strategic solutions together with stakeholder partners, specifically within the design development process to ensure the results meet the needs of the collective. That really hit home with a lot of folks. And so when you consider the complexity of stormwater management at any given jurisdiction, and then you start to think about what would that look like at a regional scale, jurisdictions partnering with each other, it's solutions that take big dollars, involve regulations, infrastructure, environmental and human health, and real impacts to local communities. So because of that, we know that though the first summit was focused on practitioners, we need to make sure that that group of practitioners includes regulators, engineers, planners, researchers, and customers, and other partners whose voices need to be a part of what we're doing. So to think of it a different way, it's participatory design. We think that produces the most durable outcomes long-term. It acknowledges the complexity and that improving regional stormwater requires all those different folks in the room. And it looks different. It looks different from government to government. It looks different from government to private organization. And then it looks different from government to community. So in the government to government space, one of the things we're asking folks is, what would it look like if we did set priorities at the watershed level, not just jurisdiction by jurisdiction? Government and private organizations think public-private partnerships, where you're actually mapping out the assets of public entities, private entities, figuring out, you're good at this, we're good at this, how can we make something work? And then government to community, what we think that is a commitment to community engagement. So really going out to communities, doing needs assessments, doing listening sessions, and then working with local residents to kind of iteratively work and plan to solve local issues. So it's more listening than telling, and it's following up and sharing that decision-making with communities in the end. We think long-term, this builds more social infrastructure, it results in greater buy-in, and again, as I mentioned, those durable outcomes. So translating the input to strategy, with 350 participants over 2 days, we got so much detailed feedback to where do you want to see us go with these next steps. It really took me at least a week to kind of process and absorb all of that information. So at a high level, it kind of all fell into about 5 buckets, which were engagement, collaborations, changes to internal administration, funding, and policies. Lots of detail in there. So it was clear there was a multi-strategy approach required to move forward with all of this. So where we started was this focus on partner engagement focused on tactical skills building. We called it tactical skills building, but it was for a strategic purpose. we had this huge group of folks. We were kind of sharing these concepts, these values that we wanted to lead with. And a lot of people said, well, hey, we don't really know about that. We want to dig into that a little bit more. So strategically, you're help building regional capacity to do it the way that we had laid out. But it is tactical skills building. So people know how to engage and move things forward. The two biggest things that people were curious to learn more about on the whole were, what is co-design? What are the components of it? How do you do it? Like, what are examples of how it's worked well? And then more specifics on local government's obligations with respect to tribal treaty rights. So in September of 2021, on the heels of the summit, we partnered with the South Central Local Integrating Organization of the Puget Sound Partnership to basically build from scratch and then co-host this community co-design training, building toward community ownership. I'll do an early plug. This is one of the resources that is available at stormwatersummit.com/resources, where all of the different trainings, including the summit itself, everything is parked there. And what we did was bring in practitioners who have been involved in successful co-design projects from up and down the West Coast, some of which had nothing to do with stormwater, just to kind of give a little bit of a perspective shift on what it is, how it plays out, and what are the outcomes. In late October, Warren King George, who is a historian for the Muckleshoot tribe, who also spoke at the summit, he and our tribal liaison for King County, Joe Hovenkotter, got together to share their respective understandings and expectations around tribal treaty rights and how we can deliver on those better. And it was kind of a cool opportunity to just take 2 hours and give each of them one and kind of let them bring their own perspective. Warren started it, and he told stories. He told stories about his family and what his family has been through, and connected that to the specific language in tribal treaty rights to say, these are the obligations and these are the things that are due to us. And then Joe got up there and he's an attorney, so he kind of broke it all down into all this detail and just made it really clear that as local governments, these are the expectations of you in working with tribes. It was a pretty powerful event. That's something that's also available on our resources page. But we got a lot of thumbs up for that. And I think we walked away with a better understanding of us as stormwater practitioners, the impacts of the work we do on tribal treaty rights and our ability to meet those. Yep, no problem. Let's see. We also knew that we wanted to pursue some regulatory enhancements such that ecology could consider how they could incentivize jurisdictions to work together and set some of these shared priorities across jurisdictional boundaries. So as I mentioned, like the structure of the current permit, we're focused on our own backyards, our own obligations. We don't have the muscle memory for that kind of regional collaboration around stormwater management. So within this, it just happened to be good timing that the Department of Ecology was organizing their ad hoc process for the next permit cycle. Are folks familiar with the ad hoc process? It's basically this opportunity for, we had about 75 different groups represented. It was municipalities, NGOs, community groups who all got together and they kind of voted. These are the things that we want to talk about, different sections of the permit, including certain topics that were not currently within the permit. So we put forward this idea of exploring regional incentives for more cooperation, and that was picked up as one of the top priorities. So there was a pretty good representational group of cities and counties. WSDOT was involved, who got together to kind of figure out, okay, what are some of the things that we could consider in the permit cycle that might help incentivize some of this collaboration? With the thought being, this would help build that regional social infrastructure to advance the stormwater investment plan. So the paper we put forward had a few different ideas. That white paper is available on the Washington Stormwater Center's website. And if anybody is interested in seeing that, I'd be glad to share it and talk through what we came up with. It's pretty extensive. We also heard from the group that they wanted more conversations around the value of regional coalition building, but also in understanding that there's got to be some kind of agreement or a framework that actually operationalizes it, that seals up those commitments and says, this is what we're going to do. So again, kind of just revisiting some of the questions from the first summit, it's kind of what could we accomplish? Just kind of that provocative question, what could we accomplish if regional stormwater managers operated as a collective at the watershed level? And could a more unified strategic approach to stormwater management help make significant gains in clean water as a region? So we realized that proceeding on to some of the next conversations we developed, including a Stormwater Summit 2.0, which I am here to advertise today, is 5 weeks from today. There's going to be a save the date coming out today. Some of the more practical questions that we need to consider is, well, how specifically would a more unified approach to stormwater management help make significant gains in clean water? And what does together look like, and how do we build it? So these are some of the questions that we're going to get into at the next event, beginning on the 30th. That will be the first of a few. So along the lines of planning for the next steps, I mentioned human and environmental health was kind of the overarching frame that we led with for the values in Summit 1.0. It really brings in community livability and equity as well. And so while we are focused on stormwater, a lot of the work that we've been doing behind the scenes over the past couple of years is trying to make meaningful connections with these other folks, because there's inherent overlap among the focus of open space protection, climate preparedness and resiliency, salmon restoration, including trails and recreation and infrastructure. So we're trying to help align ourselves with some of these different groups, because we feel like if we go forward, if we're going to be successful at multi-benefit projects, we have to start orienting ourselves toward that now. There was a really great presentation from Seattle Public Utilities a couple years ago, where the head of the organization got up there and said, we're moving into an era where we don't have the luxury of single-use investments anymore. And I think we all know that funding for things like stormwater retrofits is woefully inadequate to actually meet the need. So if that is true, why aren't we better aligning ourselves with these different, the folks working in these different spaces to try to get ready for the inevitability of having really requiring that co-benefit in projects going forward? So another piece, which is a little more internal, is the integration of internal planning tools and how we apply those new things that are coming online. So our wastewater treatment division was at the time developing their clean water plan, which is the 30-year plan for the wastewater system of the region. That's on pause right now. They're kind of retooling their community engagement approach, but that will be coming back online and has big overlap with the stormwater world. Folks probably heard the presentation earlier today on the water quality benefits evaluation, really that suite of actions that are the best investments in the best places for the right outcomes. Internally in stormwater right now, we're continuing to build out our stormwater retrofit prioritization framework. So I like to really bring that alive to help folks understand we have never had that tool internally that takes a bunch of different criteria from water quality, equity and social justice, habitat protection, and use it from a geographic point of view where you can actually prioritize, these are the basins or the sub-basins where you want to get started and focus your attention. So between those two, actually, I wish I had a very simple graphic that Carly created, which is basically the why, the where, the what, and the how. And so the why is the Clean Water Healthy Habitat Initiative. That's kind of the driver. The where is going to be informed by our stormwater retrofit prioritization framework. The what is informed by the water quality benefits evaluation. And the how is through the stormwater investment plan. How do those priorities play out on the ground? And that's really the community engagement touch point. Also want to mention, we recently at King County scaled up our own Rainscapes program, which is a GSI incentive program on private property. And that's brand new, but we've got about 100 people already waiting in line for GSI on their property. And then, of course, the fish passage prioritization effort. So we've done a massive inventory of fish barriers in King County. We're going through that prioritization process to start with the smaller number of projects that open up the largest amount of habitat. I think over the longer term, there's a lot of room for integration with stormwater retrofit in the fish passage program going forward. And we think that if we are successful at building some of these frameworks and kind of normalizing that regional collaboration across jurisdictional boundaries, we're setting the stage to advocate for supplemental regional funding. There's a lot of different examples from across the United States. And I can say from my work in Minnesota, we benefited from some of those structures being in place. That was done through a constitutional amendment. There was a vote. It wound up in the Constitution that conservation, open space, and clean water projects were funded for 35 years. And that could be possible here as well. But there are many, many mechanisms like property tax levies, sales tax measures, municipal bonds, legislative packages like the retrofit proviso that WashDOT is currently engaged with. And then a regional stormwater retrofit fund is this idea that if we actually did set priorities at the watershed level, that we would have the ability to kind of step back, look at a broader geography, apply these tools, and figure out where we should start our work and what that work should look like. That was also one of the ideas that was put forward in the white paper that was submitted to Ecology as a way that the permit cycle could help break down some barriers to achieving this. The primary one being state law currently has it that you can only spend your swim fee dollars in your jurisdiction. But what if that was loosened up to take it at a watershed level such that, hey, there's a project that's upstream of your municipality. If you were able to invest in that there, it would have benefits that accrue back to your geography. So there's a lot of different options, but ultimately this has the potential to galvanize that watershed level priority setting. So we knew that we wanted a Stormwater Summit 2.0, but we needed something to rally around. And we were hearing a lot from folks internally that next step, we've been focused on the groundswell of the practitioners and getting those folks engaged and really just building a lot of enthusiasm. The next step is to engage their elected leaders, and to bring on board elected folks. We need these big, ambitious, but informed provisional regional goals. Carly talked about some of this at the WICB presentation this morning. So some of this might be duplicative of that. So what we planned was a series of technical workshops that were advertised to the practitioners who had participated in all these events, Stormwater Summit and onward, to bring people together around these draft statements that we felt were informed by what was emerging from these new tools, and to co-design what they look like. And so that then sets those regional targets. It gives something for the elected officials to engage with, but it was also an opportunity to work with them and identify, okay, in consideration of these big goals, what are the barriers and potential solutions, and who do we need involved to help us untangle some of those barriers? So those happened over 3 workshops in November and December of 2022. There we go. So over those 3 workshops in November and December, we had about 140 folks engaged from 50 different organizations to kind of help shape these different goals, what they look like, but also what's standing in the way of us pursuing those. So as part of this, there was so much enthusiasm around this one. The sustained modeling as a part of the WICB toolkit suggests that we won't really move the needle on watershed-wide stormwater pollutant reduction without investing in these regional stormwater treatment facilities. So we believe, based on, I think it's 2019 dollars, we said earlier, that for less than $500 million, we can construct 30 regional facilities and operate and maintain them for 30 years. And that includes the cost to acquire the land. And so not just necessarily stormwater facilities, but the idea of stormwater parks has really taken off regionally. And the potential for water quality treatment, but also that community engagement touch point and providing community amenities, it's a winning package. And this was the one of the goals that was proposed where we truly had the most enthusiasm around. Yeah, we often elevate Manchester as the example. There's facilities in King County that meet this definition, but this is the one that appears the most in a lot of these presentations. So proposed goal number 2, what we put in front of the group was to treat 100 miles of roadway runoff through BMPs that remove 6 ppdq and more. All of us are well aware of the challenge of 6 ppdq and mortality rates in coho salmon. So the modeling in WICBI, for example, suggested that treating runoff from 100 miles of roadway was an ambitious goal. But it also found that the high performance bioretention media and media filter drains were cost-effective choices for reducing total suspended sediment. Bigger picture, we know that there's the big bang for the buck in the stormwater parks and those regional facilities, but that does not preclude distributed treatment. So this is intended to provide some of that secondary treatment, maybe not as big bang for the buck, but nonetheless, when you take it all on the whole, it does a lot. And then this presentation was completed before we had a workshop this week. So this has changed a little bit, but just what we put in front of the group was that the new modeling suggested that this providing flow control to 1,000 acres through a mix of GSI and new retrofitted detention ponds that could be achieved with less than 3,000 rain gardens of bioretention, 100 new detention ponds. I think there's some animation that's moving this forward, and 100 retrofitted detention ponds. So the back of the envelope calculation said that could be done in the $500 million range over 30 years. But analyzing flow control investments is the next phase of sustain. It won't be finished for a couple of years. But again, these are provisional regional targets that are intended to inspire action and get the elected officials on board. We fully expect these to change. This has since changed. We also offered a follow-on workshop, which was just this past Monday. So this is going to continue to evolve, but really it's just that tool to get people inspired and something to rally around. And so coming back here, in between the workshops and the summit, we've been trying to work with partners who can contribute to these solutions, identify who needs to be a part of the summit. And here we are. So it's soon, but it's just 5 weeks out. We're going to be hosting this virtual event where the county executive wants to reconvene the original group and those who have come along since, announce and celebrate these big provisional goals, and then bring in other local elected officials who can commit to this and figure out how we're going to move this forward. So in the continuing series of Aligning Across Watersheds, a second summit, the working agenda again is to share out and to celebrate those provisional goals. It's the executive's opportunity to say to the audience, you all are the experts and you all help craft this. And to thank them for that. And then to continue that call to action, which is really, if we continue to operate in our own backyards, we're never going to solve the problem. So let's make this happen. And we are bringing in the regional administrator from US EPA Region 10, the Department of Ecology, the Assistant Secretary from the Department of Transportation, as well as tribal perspectives to offer their support in truly what they can do to help support our work, both from a funding perspective, but also to help break down some of those barriers to achieving these big regional goals. And then we'll be hearing from local elected officials who have experience with the salmon restoration councils, the RIAs, because those folks are the smaller scale example of what we're trying to build at the Puget Sound level. Jurisdictions coming together to set shared priorities for restoration and action beyond just their backyards. We often internally hold up the King County Cities Climate Collaborative model as well as in a forum where they set bold, ambitious regional targets. And then it was kind of the coalition of the willing. The cities that wanted to come along with this signed on to an agreement, a charter. These are the things we commit to. So we were going to have these folks who represent also jurisdictions, city council members and mayors saying, we've done this before, you can do it in the stormwater space. And so we expect other local elected officials to hear that message and also want to come along. This isn't something from scratch, and I think that's a really, really important part of the story. And even though they gave me an hour, that's what I have. So I hope that kind of expanded out what I was originally thinking I was going to say to kind of give the broader context of what motivated this, where we've been, and where we're trying to go. So if you are interested in more resources, stormwatersummit.com. If you are not someone who receives emails from me currently, but would be interested in that, please shoot me a message. This is my email, and then I can also make sure that you receive the invite for the event in 5 weeks. Yesterday, I met a colleague from Thurston County whose name I knew, but I had never met her. And the first thing she said is, "You're the collaboration guy." And so if that's the message that's getting out there, we're doing the right things. So that's what I had for you today. And thanks for listening.